I never thought I'd sign away my home with my own trembling hand. The pen felt heavy that morning, heavier than it should have. It wasn't just ink it carried, but 30 years of memories. The smell of lemon polish from my kitchen, the echo of my late husband's laughter down the hall, the sound of my daughter's feet running to me when she was little. All of it seemed to hum quietly in the air as I signed that paper. "I promise, Mama," she said softly, her voice gentle but urgent. "This is just to help us get back on our feet. You'll still own the house. It's just paperwork." She smiled when she said it, that same dimple she had when she was a child. It had always been my weakness. I nodded, even though a small voice deep inside whispered for me to slow down, to ask more questions. But love can make you deaf to reason. And love, especially a mother's love, can make you sign things you don't fully understand. Before all that, my days had a rhythm that made sense. I woke up early, just as the sun slipped through the lace curtains in my kitchen. The kettle would whistle while I fed my cat, Missy, and I'd watch the birds gather on the fence outside. I'd sit at my table with a cup of tea, the radio humming old gospel songs, and think about how quiet the house had become since my husband, Albert, passed 10 years ago. It was a peaceful quiet, though a kind of gentle solitude that didn't hurt as much as it used to. My daughter, Denise, lived 2 towns over with her husband, Marcus, and their little boy, Elijah. They came by once or twice a month, usually on Sundays. I loved those visits, the smell of roast chicken filling the house, the sound of Elijah's laughter bouncing off the walls. He'd race through the living room with his toy trucks while Denise scolded him half-hearted. "Mama," she'd call out, laughing, "you've spoiled him with all these sweets again." And I'd shrug, smiling. That's what grandmas do. Those were good days, simple, ordinary, and filled with the kind of warmth that makes a house feel alive. But I noticed things started to shift that spring. Denise called less. When she did, her voice had a tightness to it, like she was always rushing. The laughter I loved hearing from her visits was replaced with sighs. She'd say things like, "We're just dealing with a lot right now," or "Marcus's business isn't doing too well." I didn't pry at first. She had always been proud, and I respected that. But the worry began to creep in when she stopped visiting altogether. One Thursday evening, just as I was settling in to watch the evening news, my phone rang. It was Denise. "Mama," she said, her voice trembling. I don't even know how to say this. We're drowning." The words spilled out between sobs. Marcus's landscaping business had fallen behind on contracts, their mortgage payments were late, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. She said they were facing bankruptcy and didn't know what to do. I listened, heart aching, as she cried on the other end. "Mama," they said, "if we can just get a lump sum, something to show good faith, we can renegotiate. I hate to ask you this, but is there any way you could help us?" I sat there, staring at the photo of her and Elijah on my mantel. My daughter. My baby girl. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing her school dresses when money was tight, the times I went without new shoes so she could have dance lessons. She was my only child. "Of course, baby," I said quietly. "Tell me what you need." A week later, she came over with Marcus. He was polite, respectful, but unusually quiet. He brought a folder with papers and numbers I didn't really understand, interest rates, refinancing terms, signatures. Denise did most of the talking. "It's called a second mortgage, Mama," she explained. "You won't lose anything. We'll handle the payments. It's just a way for you to use some of the home's equity to help us out. You'll still have your name on everything." Marcus nodded in agreement, sliding the documents toward me. "We'll make sure every payment's on time. It's just until we stabilize." The words sounded official, rehearsed almost. But I didn't see malice in their eyes, just exhaustion. Fear. I thought of the little boy who depended on them. I signed where they told me to sign. When we left the bank that day, Denise hugged me tightly in the parking lot. "Mama, I promise you we'll make this right." "You saved us." I smiled, tears in my eyes. That's what mothers do. For a while, things seemed fine. They sent me monthly updates. Denise would text, "Made the payment today, Mama. Thank you again." I even visited them once, and the house looked cheerful again. Elijah playing in the yard, Marcus grilling, laughter floating through the air. It made me proud. I thought maybe I did the right thing after all. But as the months passed, the messages stopped. When I called, Denise would answer quickly, always sounding distracted. "Everything's fine, Mama. Just busy," she'd say before hanging up. I didn't press her. Not yet. Then, one afternoon in early autumn, I came home from the grocery store to find a letter stuck in my mailbox, a notice from the bank. I didn't understand all the language, but the words delinquent and payment overdue jumped out at me. My hands began to shake. I called Denise immediately. "Sweetheart, I just got a strange letter, something about missed payments." There was a long pause. Then she sighed. "Oh, Mama, don't worry about that. It's just a mix-up. Marcus is handling it." "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice thin. "Yes, Mama," she said quickly. "Please, just trust me." I wanted to. Lord knows I did. But that night, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at that letter, I felt something twist in my gut, something I hadn't felt since the day Albert died. The quiet kind of fear that comes when you realize something precious might be slipping away. That letter sat on my kitchen table for weeks, tucked under a vase of dried lilies. Every time I passed it, I'd feel a small tug in my chest, like an itch I couldn't quite reach. I tried to go on with life as usual. On Sunday mornings, I still put on my best dress for church, pressing the fabric until it was smooth as glass. I still baked sweetbread for the neighbours, still kept my rose garden trimmed the way Albert used to like. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Denise's calls grew shorter, sometimes skipped altogether. When I did manage to reach her, her tone had a strange edge, hurried, tired, almost irritated. One evening, after choir practice, I decided to stop by her house unannounced. I told myself it was just to bring Elijah some of the pound cake I'd baked. Truth was, I needed to see with my own eyes that everything was okay. When I pulled up, the porch light was off, though it wasn't yet 9. The yard, once neatly trimmed, looked overgrown, toys scattered everywhere. I knocked softly. No answer. I called her phone. Just as I turned to leave, the curtain in the front window moved. A shadow. Then Denise opened the door a crack. "Mama? What are you doing here?" Her voice was sharp, almost defensive. "I was just in the neighborhood," I lied, holding up the foil-covered cake. "Thought I'd drop this off for Elijah." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. The living room looked messy, cluttered with unopened mail and fast food bags. Marcus wasn't there. Denise took the cake and set it on the counter without unwrapping it. "Thanks, Mama. That's sweet of you." I studied her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the tension around her mouth. "You all right, baby?" I asked quietly. She exhaled hard, rubbing her temples. "We're fine. Just stressed." "You know how it is." But I didn't know, and she wouldn't tell me. A week later, I got another letter. This one was more serious. It mentioned intent to foreclose and a date circled in red. I sat at my table, glasses perched low on my nose, trying to make sense of it. The next morning, I went to the bank myself. The young man behind the counter, polite but nervous, pulled up my account and frowned. "Mrs. Holloway, it appears payments on your home equity loan haven't been made for 3 months." My stomach dropped. What do you mean, my payments? He looked confused. Ma'am, you're listed as the primary borrower. For a moment I couldn't breathe. But my daughter and her husband said they'd be handling that. They said. He glanced around awkwardly, lowering his voice. I'm sorry, ma'am. The account is under your name. They might have been authorized users, but legally, responsibility falls on you. The room tilted a little. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Is there any way to fix it? I asked. Can I make a payment today? He nodded sympathetically. You can make a partial payment, but you'll need to speak with the loan officer to avoid foreclosure proceedings. My voice trembled. Can you please give me her name? That afternoon, I called Denise. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. Hey, Mama, she said, sounding distracted. Can I call you back later? I'm in the middle of something. No, you can't, I said firmly. I just came from the bank. They said the payments haven't been made in months. Silence. Then, Mama, I told you we're handling it. The bank's just being dramatic. Dramatic? My voice cracked. They said they're about to take my house, Denise. The one your father and I worked our whole lives for. She sighed, a long, frustrated sigh that made me feel small. Please don't make this harder, Mama. We're doing the best we can. You think I want this? Tears burned behind my eyes. I don't know what to think anymore. I'll call you tomorrow, she said, her tone flat. I promise. But she didn't. Days passed. Then weeks. When I called, she stopped answering altogether. Her voicemail box was full. The few times I reached Marcus, he'd mutter something about working on it before hanging up. It was around that time that Elijah's teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Daniels, called me by accident. She thought she was leaving a message for Denise. Just checking if Elijah's settled in at his new school, she said cheerfully before realizing her mistake. New school, I repeated. Yes, she said slowly. Didn't you know? The family moved out of town last month. I sat frozen. Moved? Where? Oh, I assumed you knew, she said, voice softening. They didn't leave a forwarding address. My knees gave out before I could end the call. That night I walked through every room in my house, the one I had raised my child in, and every memory seemed to ache. The photographs on the walls felt like ghosts. I could still see Denise as a little girl, wearing her Sunday dress, tugging at my hand in church. How had we gotten here? By morning, I made up my mind. I packed a small bag and drove to their old neighborhood, hoping someone, a neighbor, a friend, could tell me where they'd gone. The woman next door, a retired nurse named Helen, opened her door and frowned when she saw me. Oh, Miss Holloway, you didn't hear? They left in a hurry. Middle of the night almost. U-Haul and everything. My heart thudded. Did they say where they were going? No, ma'am. Looked like they were in trouble, though. The man from the bank came by 2 days later asking questions. I thanked her and got back into my car. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely fit the key into the ignition. When I got home, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the front porch, the flowers I planted, the welcome mat Denise bought me on Mother's Day years ago. Then I saw it, a notice taped to my door. Final warning. Foreclosure effective in 30 days. My throat tightened as I tore it down. The paper fluttered in my trembling hands, the ink bleeding where my tears hit the page. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat at my kitchen table, lights dim, listening to the clock tick. Every sound in the house felt louder, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind brushing against the windows, and for the first time in my life, I admitted something I'd been too afraid to say out loud. My daughter had taken my trust and turned it into a weapon. The next morning, I ironed a blouse that didn't need ironing. It was a nervous habit, the hiss of steam, the clean press, something I could control when everything else felt slippery. I pinned my hair back, put on a little lipstick, and drove to the bank with a folder of bills I'd organized so neatly it made my chest hurt. The loan officer, a woman named Ms. Patel, met me with a careful smile. Her office smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. A framed photo of two boys in soccer uniforms sat by the monitor, and a stack of manila folders leaned like a tired tower beside her keyboard. Mrs. Hugh keyed, Mrs. Hugh keyboard. Holloway, she said, motioning me to sit. I looked over your file. My throat was dry. I'm hoping there's been some mistake. She folded her hands. I wish I could tell you that. You made 3 payments after closing, and then there were no more. Notices were sent. I didn't get them, I whispered. I didn't get a single one. She clicked through a screen, the faint tap-tap of her nails the only sound. I see there was a mailing address changed 9 months ago. The room seemed to shrink around me. Changed to where? She turned her screen slightly, then seemed to think better of it and read the address aloud. It was Denise's street. Not the old one with the overgrown lawn. Another one I didn't recognize. That's not my address, I said. The syllables landed like stones. I never told you to send anything there. Mrs. Cole you to send anything there. Patel's face softened. Someone with access to the account portals requested it. They were listed as an authorized contact at closing. I shut my eyes for a second, and the memory came back with a strange clarity. The closing table, the neat stack of papers, the pen passed from hand to hand. Denise's fingers lightly over mine when I hesitated, the way she smiled at me, quick and reassuring, when the notary slid a form forward. This just lets us talk to the bank if we need to, Mama. It saves you the headache. I didn't understand what I was signing, I said. Not an excuse, a confession. Miss Patel cleared her throat. I also pulled the disbursement from closing. The funds didn't go toward your debts, Mrs. Istakouros. Holloway, they were wired to a business account. Business account? An LLC, she said carefully, checking the screen. ME Family Services. I repeated it under my breath, as if the name could rearrange itself into something gentler. ME, Marcus and Denise. Family Services. Did that money help them keep their home? My voice had thinned out. Threads pulled loose. Miss pulled loose. Miss Gentle. Patel looked down. I can't speak to what happened after the wire went out. Then softly, I held my purse close to my body on the walk to the car, like someone might try to take it. The steering wheel felt slick in my hands, even though it wasn't hot. It took me a long time to turn the key. I stopped at the grocery store for milk I didn't need. In the dairy aisle, a baby somewhere started to cry, that breathless, gulping sound that always cracked me open. Right there between the yogurt and the butter, I leaned my palms against the cart and let a few tears fall. Nobody paid me any mind. That's one thing about getting older. You turn invisible in public, unless you're in someone's way. Back home, I set the milk in the fridge and pulled down the biscuit tin where I kept old bills, warranties, tax forms. The paper trail of a life that tried to be responsible. I put everything in order on the table. The closing statement, my notes, a list of phone calls I'd made and when. I wrote down the name of the LLC and circled it. Then I wrote my daughter's name beneath it and circled that too. I called Marcus. It rang once, then clicked straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I didn't know where to try next until I looked at the church bulletin tucked under my purse. Tasha's name was there, a young woman from the choir who worked in social services, and more importantly, knew how to find things online. She was born into the internet the way I was born into Sunday dresses and paper checks. "Tasha, baby," I said when she picked up. "Could you come by for a minute? I need a hand." She arrived half an hour later with a hug that smelled like shea butter and coffee. We sat at my kitchen table while she opened her laptop, tapping fast with her painted nails. "Okay, let's start with the business name." Within minutes, she found a state registry listing. Emmy Family Services, registered to a mailbox store in a strip mall 2 towns over. No real address. We dug around some more, a few sad reviews on a local forum, complaints about promised services that never showed up, people unable to get refunds. Tasha clicked her tongue. Looks like a hustle that never got off the ground. She switched to social media. Denise's profile was locked down, but her cousin, the one who posted everything, had tagged her last month. There was a picture of Denise, standing in front of a beige apartment complex I didn't recognize, holding a set of keys and smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The caption, "New beginnings, pray for us." I touched the screen without meaning to. "New beginnings," I repeated, and the words turned to ash in my mouth. Tasha looked at me. "You want me to keep going?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Please." We found the apartment complex through the photo's geotag, a cookie-cutter place off a highway in a newer part of town. I wrote the address down and underlined it. My hands had stopped shaking. The room felt very quiet, like the house itself was listening. Tasha squeezed my shoulder. "Do you want me to drive you?" I shook my head. "Not today." I closed my notebook. "Today I'm going to eat something and sleep. Tomorrow I'll see what's there." She lingered, eyes searching my face. "You don't have to do this alone." "I know," I said, and I did, which didn't change that I would. I got up early, made scrambled eggs I barely tasted, and drove out of town. The highway stretched like a ribbon under a white sky. At the complex, I parked by the leasing office and sat for a minute with the engine off, listening to the tick of the cooling hood. Somewhere was frying bacon. The smell drifted on the breeze. A young man with a lanyard and a tired smile opened the office door. "You here to tour?" "I'm looking for a tenant," I said. "My daughter." "Denise Holloway." I gave him the address I'd written down. He frowned, tapping at his screen. "Sorry, we can't give out tenant info." I pressed my hands flat on the desk and tried to keep my voice gentle. "I'm not asking for details." "I'm just trying to see if she's all right." He shifted, uneasy. Then his expression softened a notch. "They moved out last week," he said, lowering his voice. "Broke the lease. Left a note. Said it was an emergency." My ears buzzed. "They're gone." "Yeah. Left late. Night move." He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm really not supposed to say more." I nodded and thanked him. On the way back to the parking lot, I noticed a small boy sitting on the curb with a popsicle, legs swinging. He looked about Elijah's age. When he smiled at me, the sweetness hit my tongue, that syrupy, artificial fruit smell, bright and summery even on a dull day. I thought of Elijah's soft hair against my cheek the last time I'd kissed him goodbye. I had to grip the car door to keep from swaying. Back home, I called the loan's customer service line, then another line, then the loss mitigation department whose name felt like a joke. I repeated my story to 3 different people, wrote down 3 different case numbers, and finally landed with a woman whose voice was warm and steady, like a hand on your back. "Mrs. Aversand, Holloway, I can put a temporary hold on further action if you can make a reinstatement payment by the end of the month. That would cover the missed payments and fees." "How much?" I asked. She told me. I pressed the phone to my ear and looked around at my kitchen. The ceramic rooster salt shaker, the faded dish towel, the ordinary things that only meant something because they lived in this specific place. The number might as well have been a mountain. I can't do that, I said quietly. Are there any family members who can assist? She asked. A laugh escaped me, raw and too loud in the small room. No, baby, I said softly. That's how I got here. She was silent for a beat, then said, I'm sorry. When we hung up, I stared at my hands. They were my mother's hands now, thin-skinned, with veins like little rivers. These hands had braided hair, shelled peas, signed field trip, permission slips, stitched hems in the car with tiny crooked stitches. These hands had held Denise's face when she was feverish and whispered, Mama's here. These hands had signed my house away because I believed my child would not let me drown. The doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a neat jacket holding a brown envelope, his jaw set. I knew before he spoke. Miss Holloway, he said. You've been served. He handed me the envelope with a practiced politeness and walked away before I could say a word. I set the envelope on the table like it might burn through the wood. Then I opened it. Notice of trustee's sale, a date, a time, instructions about vacating the property. The house was very quiet. The clock on the wall ticked, and I could hear the sound of my own breath. In, out, in, like a small, stubborn engine. I dialed Denise. For a long time it rang. Then a voice answered, barely more than a breath. Hello, Denise. I heard how I said her name, like a prayer that had lost its words. Baby, they're going to take the house. She didn't reply at first. When she spoke, her voice was different from any I'd known. Mew, flat, tired all the way to the bone. Mama, please stop calling. Stop. I'm about to lose everything. I can't help you, she said. I could hear a television in the background, a muffled laugh track. I'm sorry. Where are you? It came out sharper than I meant. Where is my grandson? Silence again. Then, we're fine. Denise. Listen to me, I said, standing without meaning to, one hand on the back of a chair. You changed my mailing address. The bank told me. You took the money, wired it to that company. I don't even care about that right now, I just... My voice shook. I need my house. On her end, a door closed. Her voice closer. You don't understand what we were dealing with. Help me understand, I whispered. A pause so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, there was a fissure of anger in it. You think we used you, but you always had that house, Mama. You never had to worry about rent, about overdue notices. We were drowning. I know, I said. That's why I jumped in. My fingers dug into the chair's wood, but you didn't pull me back. Breathing, the faint scrape of a lighter, the click of a stove, maybe. Tiny sounds that made the distance feel unfairly intimate. I have to go, she said. Denise, please. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and stared at my reflection in the dark window. A faint outline, a woman holding a small, silent thing to her ear. Outside, the streetlight flickered on, and the porch took on that old evening hush I used to love. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and then didn't. I picked up the envelope, folded it, and slid it back inside. I smoothed the crease with my palm until the paper lay obedient and still. Then I did what I knew how to do when fear pressed its full weight on my chest. I put water on to boil. I washed 2 already clean cups. I lined up the sugar and the tea, as if guests might arrive who needed comforting. There would be no guests. But there would be a morning. And in that morning, I would go looking for someone who could stand in a courtroom and say my name with power. The kettle began to sing. I took it off the flame and let the steam fog the air, the warm, damp breath of something that refused to disappear. The morning I met my lawyer. The sky hung low and grey, that turns everything silver, even the cracks in the sidewalk. I wore my church coat, the good one, and a hat Albert had bought me on our 10th anniversary. It made me feel steady, even if my insides were anything but. The office was small but tidy, tucked between a beauty salon and a check-cashing place. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, and the receptionist had a kind smile that reminded me of my sister when she was young. Mrs. Young was young. "Holloway," a voice called from the doorway. The lawyer, a woman in her late 40s named Laura Green, shook my hand firmly. Her grip was warm, confident. I could tell she'd seen a lot of heartache come through her door, but she hadn't let it make her cold. We sat across from each other at a round table. I slid the envelope, the bank letters, and the copy of my loan documents toward her. She took her time reading, her pen tapping softly on the edge of the desk. When she looked up, her eyes held something that wasn't pity. It was respect. "Mrs. Holloway," she said slowly, "you've been the victim of financial exploitation. Likely elder abuse, though it's going to take some work to prove it." The words elder abuse hit me like a cold wind. "My daughter," I said quietly. "My own daughter," Laura nodded gently. "That doesn't make it any less wrong. It just makes it more painful." She explained what we were up against, how the bank would say I'd signed willingly, how Denise and Marcus would claim it was all a misunderstanding. But she said there were ways to fight, evidence of fraud, false addresses, unauthorized access. "I can't promise we'll save the house," she said, "but I can promise we'll be heard." Something about the way she said we steadied me. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I spent hours in that little office, telling my story again and again. Each time I did, it hurt a little less. Not because it mattered less, but because the truth was no longer trapped inside me. Laura helped me file a complaint with the state's Consumer Protection Agency. We gathered statements from the bank, copies of every document Denise had touched, even the notary's testimony. The hardest part was listing her name, my own child, as the primary suspect. The day I signed that affidavit, my hand trembled. Laura looked at me softly. "It's okay to love her and still hold her accountable." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I just keep thinking, what did I do wrong raising her?" "You raised her to believe you'd always catch her," Laura said. "Some people mistake that for permission." Her words stayed with me for days. When the foreclosure notice finally turned into a court summons, I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, not the loud kind of anger that burns out quick, but the quiet kind that sharpens your spine. The hearing took place on a chilly Tuesday morning. The courtroom smelled faintly of floor polish and old paper. I sat at the wooden table with Laura beside me, her notes stacked neatly, her voice steady as she presented the facts. Across the aisle, the bank's lawyer spoke in practiced tones, polite but dismissive. Mrs. Holloway willingly entered this agreement. Her daughter's subsequent financial troubles, while unfortunate, are irrelevant to the contract. I wanted to stand and shout irrelevant. But I sat still, hands clasped tight, remembering Laura's advice. "Dignity is your weapon, Mrs. Yed. Holloway. Don't let them take that too." When it was my turn to speak, my throat tightened. The judge, a kind-eyed woman, nodded for me to begin. I told my story slowly, the smell of lemon polish in my kitchen. My daughter's voice that day, the way her hand covered mine as I signed. I told her about the letters, the address change, the silence that followed. "I didn't understand what I was giving away," I said. "Because I trusted my child, that's all. I trusted." The courtroom was quiet when I finished. Even the bank lawyer looked away for a moment. The judge thanked me and said she'd review the evidence before making her decision. As we stood to leave, Laura touched my arm. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you did something powerful today." You told the truth. The decision came 3 weeks later. I was sitting on my porch with Missy curled in my lap when Laura's number lit up my phone. "The judge granted an injunction," she said, her voice bright. "They can't proceed with foreclosure until we finish the fraud investigation. That buys us time." I closed my eyes, relief washing through me like warm water. "Time," I said softly. "That's all I needed. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a pause, a breath, a chance to stand before the storm swallowed me whole." Still, the house felt different now. Every creak and corner carried the echo of betrayal. Some nights I'd sit up listening for sounds that weren't there. Denise's laughter, Elijah's little feet pattering down the hallway. I prayed for them every night, even through the anger, the shame, the confusion. I prayed because love doesn't vanish just because it's been misused. One morning, about 2 months after the hearing, I got a letter from Denise. It was postmarked from another state. The envelope was wrinkled, like it had been carried around too long before she decided to send it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting was neat but rushed. "Mama, I know you hate me and you have every reason to. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Marcus said he could fix it, that we'd pay it all back before it caught up with us. I believed him. I thought I could protect you by keeping quiet, but I only made it worse. I'm sorry, Mama, truly. Please tell Elijah one day that his mama wasn't all bad, that I just made a mess I couldn't clean up." There was no return address. I read that letter 3 times. My tears fell on the ink, smudging the last few lines until they looked like shadows on the page. A week later, Laura called again. "We've got good news," she said. "The fraud investigation went in our favor. The judge ordered the bank to renegotiate your loan. You'll keep your home." I couldn't speak for a moment. Then I laughed, a small, broken laugh that turned into a sob. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of my living room, sunlight spilling across the rug, and whispered, "Thank you. Not to the court, not to the lawyer, but to God and to Albert and to every ancestor who'd ever fought for a roof over their family's head." But I knew something else too. I couldn't keep living in this house like it was untouched. The walls held too many ghosts now, of love, of lies, of lessons learned too late. I called Laura and told her I wanted to sell the home once things settled. Not out of bitterness, I said, out of peace. It took 6 months. I sold the house to a young couple, expecting their first baby. I told them about the creaky stair, the best place to plant azaleas, the way the kitchen caught morning light. The day I handed over the keys, I didn't cry. I just touched the front door once, a gentle farewell, and whispered, "Thank you for keeping us safe." I moved into a small apartment near the community centre. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And this time, every signature, every paper, every detail had my name on it alone. That's where the next chapter began, the one I never expected. At first, the quiet in that little apartment was unfamiliar. Not the comfortable quiet of home, but a hollow one, like a church after everyone's gone home and the candles are still smoking. The floors were new laminate, pale and clean, without a single scratch to remember me by. The walls were a soft cream, bare, except for one framed photo I'd brought, Denise as a little girl, sitting on Albert's shoulders at the county fair. She was about 6 then, her hair in 2 pigtails, cotton candy in her hand. Every night I looked at that picture before bed. For a while I didn't know what to do with myself. My days had been filled with paperwork, hearings, worry. Now there was only space. Long, wide hours of silence. But God has a way of nudging you toward purpose when you least expect it. It started one afternoon when I stopped by the community centre to drop off a donation box of books. The director, a lively woman named Nora, was setting up chairs in the rec room. "You got good timing," she said, wiping her forehead. "Our speaker for the senior class cancelled last minute. You wouldn't happen to know anything about mortgages, would you?" She laughed too, and before I knew it, she was handing me a cup of coffee and saying, "Then why don't you stay and talk to them? Tell your story. Folks learn better from real life than from pamphlets." I tried to protest, but somehow, when the small group of women started gathering, all looking at me expectantly, I found myself sitting in front of them, words spilling out. I told them everything, from Denise's first phone call to the foreclosure letter on my door. I spoke slowly, steady, not to shame myself or anyone else, but to teach. I explained the small things I wished I'd known. The importance of reading every line, keeping mail addresses separate, asking questions even when it's family. By the end, some of the women were crying. One of them, a tall woman with grey braids, said quietly, "My son's been asking me to co-sign a loan. I was about to do it this week." I looked at her and said, "Ask to see everything first, baby. Don't let love blind your eyes." When the session ended, Nora came over, eyes shining. "You have a gift," she said. "Would you come back next month and do it again? We'll call it Protect What's Yours." I smiled for the first time in a long time. I'd like that. Word spread faster than I expected. The next time I came, there were twice as many people, men and women, some younger, some older. They came with notebooks, questions, even copies of their own papers. I wasn't an expert, but I knew pain and I knew warning signs. And sometimes that's all people need, a voice that's been through the storm and lived to tell how the wind sounds. Soon, the community centre turned the meetings into a regular workshop. We talked about wills, credit scams. The room would get quiet sometimes when I spoke about Denise. I never used her name. I just said, "Someone I love deeply taught me this lesson." And I meant that, because as much as her choices had cost me, they also carved something new inside me. A strength I didn't know I still had. One afternoon, about a year later, I was setting up chairs for the workshop when a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 30. Her eyes were red from crying. "Are you Mrs. Inchil Holloway?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart." She held out an envelope. "A woman came by the centre earlier. She said she didn't have the courage to come in, but she wanted you to have this." I took the envelope, my heart already racing. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was Denise's. I sat down before I opened it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the note. "Mama, we're in Georgia now. Marcus left. I'm working 2 jobs, trying to make it right. Elijah's in school. He's growing so fast you wouldn't believe it. I saw online that you're teaching those classes. Someone shared a flyer. I'm proud of you, Mama. I really am. I know I can't undo what I did. I just want you to know I'm sorry. And I'm trying to become someone you can forgive. Love, Denise." My throat closed up. I read the letter twice before folding it neatly and tucking it into my purse. Forgiveness wasn't simple. It wasn't a light switch you could flip. It was more like learning to breathe again after being underwater too long. One breath at a time. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about the house I'd lost, the years that had vanished, and the daughter I was still learning to love from afar. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt steady, like the world had gone full circle and set me back on my feet. The next morning, when I began my class, I opened with something new. "Before we start," I said, looking around the room, "I want to tell you something. Sometimes the people who hurt us are the same ones we raised with our own 2 hands. It doesn't mean they didn't love us. It means they were lost. And sometimes the best thing we can do for them, and for ourselves, is to stop drowning beside them." The room was silent, except for the hum of the old air conditioner. Then one woman, the same one who'd once told me her son needed a co-signer, lifted her hand and whispered, "Amen." And just like that, the silence broke. Months rolled into years. My little class turned into a program. Local papers wrote about it. Churches invited me to speak. Even the city's senior services office asked me to consult on workshops. Every time I stood before a room of strangers, I'd think of the day I sat in that courtroom, trembling, ashamed, and how far I'd come since then. Sometimes, after a session, people would stay behind just to talk. One woman hugged me once and said, "You saved me from losing my mama's house." I smiled through tears and told her. Then my story did its job. I learned something in those years, something powerful. When you turn your pain into purpose, it stops owning you. One evening, I got a photo in the mail. No note, just a picture. It was Elijah, sitting on a school stage in a little suit, smiling wide, holding a certificate. The back said, "Third grade spelling bee champion." I held that photo against my chest and cried, not the way I used to, not from grief, but from gratitude. Some bridges don't burn completely, some just take a long time to rebuild. And maybe one day when he's old enough, Elijah will ask about that old house. And I'll tell him, it's where your mama and I both learned the hardest lesson, that love needs boundaries, same as a garden needs a fence. A few years passed before I saw Denise again. It was a Sunday in late spring, the kind of day that smells like rain before it falls. I had just finished teaching a workshop at the church hall when Nora came to the door. "Someone's here to see you," she whispered. When I turned around, she was standing there. My daughter. Denise looked smaller than I remembered, as if life had folded her down at the edges. Her hair was tied back, streaked with early grey. Elijah stood beside her, a few inches taller than I expected, his face soft but cautious. He held a small bouquet of daisies. "Hi, Mama," Denise said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, I couldn't move. All those years of silence, of letters and prayers, collapsed into the space between us. Then I did what my heart had been waiting to do. I opened my arms. She came into them like a child, sobbing against my shoulder. I didn't ask for explanations. Not right then. Sometimes forgiveness starts before understanding. When she pulled back, her eyes were red, but she was smiling through it. "You look good," she said softly. "Stronger." I nodded. I had to be. We sat in the fellowship hall with paper cups of lemonade while Elijah played nearby with another child. Denise told me bits and pieces, how Marcus had disappeared, how she'd worked cleaning houses and managing bills, how she'd been too ashamed to reach out until she saw a newspaper article about my program. "You turned our mess into something beautiful," she said, tears welling again. "I don't deserve your kindness, Mama." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Baby, we all deserve a second chance, but we have to earn it." She nodded slowly, gripping my hand tighter. That summer, Denise and Elijah started visiting me once a week. We didn't talk much about the past. Not yet, but we built new habits. Gentle ones. She'd bring groceries. I'd cook supper. We'd sit by the window and talk about small things. School, work, the weather, until the heaviness lifted enough for laughter to peek through. One evening as I was washing dishes, she came beside me and said quietly, "I want to pay you back, Mama. Every penny." I turned to her and smiled. "You don't owe me money anymore, Denise. You owe me honesty. Keep that promise, and we'll be fine." Her shoulders dropped, a visible release. "I can do that," she whispered. From then on, she did. She told me about her counseling, her savings account, how she was slowly learning to stand on her own 2 feet. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the same light in her eyes that I remembered from her childhood. that unguarded, hopeful glow. The following spring, the community centre celebrated the 5th anniversary of Protect What's Yours. They invited the local paper, and I was asked to give a speech. I stood before the crowd, rows of faces I'd come to know and love, and spoke from the heart. I started this program because I lost something I thought I could never live without. I began. But what I learned is that a home isn't just a building. It's a place where truth lives. And if truth leaves, the roof will fall, no matter how strong the walls. People nodded, some with tears in their eyes. Denise and Elijah sat in the front row. When I looked at them, Denise smiled. Proud, quiet, whole. After the ceremony, Elijah ran up to me, clutching a drawing he'd made of a little house under a bright sun. "Grandma," he said. I drew our new house. "It's yours too." I bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Thank you, baby. That means more than you know. Life found its rhythm again. Not the same one, a new one." My mornings began with sunlight spilling across my kitchen table, the smell of coffee and lavender soap. I'd read the newspaper, hum a hymn, and smile knowing my story, the one that once nearly broke me, had helped protect dozens of families from walking the same painful road. Sometimes after class, women would come up and whisper things like, "My daughter tried to put me on a loan, but I said no." Or, "I showed my mama how to keep her name safe." Each time I'd feel that small flicker of purpose catch fire again. That was my redemption, not revenge, not even reconciliation, but prevention, turning my wound into a warning light for others. A few years later, I visited Denise and Elijah in their new home, a modest little townhouse painted light blue. Denise had planted tulips by the walkway, and Elijah had hung his drawings on the fridge. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the air. She handed me a mug of tea and said, "You know, Mama, I tell everyone what you taught me, about boundaries and paperwork and not letting guilt make you foolish." I chuckled softly. "You calling your own mama foolish?" She grinned. "No, ma'am. Just saying you're wiser now." I sipped my tea, looked around that cozy room, and felt something loosen inside me, something that had been tight for too long. Maybe the house I'd lost had made space for this one. That night, before I left, Denise walked me to the car. The sky was that deep indigo that only happens before rain. She hesitated, then said, "Mama, do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought for a moment. "Sometimes," I said truthfully. "But then I remember, if they hadn't gone this way, I might never have learned what I was capable of." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "I'm trying to be that kind of strong now." I touched her cheek the way I used to when she was small. "You already are. It's been almost 10 years now since that chapter of my life began. I've retired from the workshops, though the program still runs strong. Sometimes, when I pass by the community centre, I see new faces leading the sessions, young people teaching elders, elders teaching youth. It makes me proud. Denise visits often. Elijah's a teenager now, taller than both of us. Every time he hugs me goodbye, I whisper a little prayer of gratitude. I still keep the old letter she sent, the one written in her lowest moment. It reminds me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's wisdom, and it reminds me to never let love and trust blur into the same thing. People often ask me now, "How did you find the strength to start over?" And I tell them this: strength isn't about not falling, it's about learning how to stand up without bitterness in your heart. Losing that house taught me that the real foundation of home isn't wood or brick, it's self-respect, faith, and knowledge. Those are the things no one can take from you, not even the people you love most. If my story reaches even one person, one mother, one grandmother, who's about to sign something she doesn't understand out of love, I hope she stops and remembers me. I hope she looks at that pen in her hand and asks, will this decision honor both my love and my life? Because love without wisdom is how we lose ourselves. And wisdom, my dear, is how we find our way back. When I sit on my porch now, the small one outside my apartment, with potted herbs and a chair Albert once built, I sometimes think about that day at the bank, the paper trembling under my hand. And I realize that moment didn't define me. It refined me. And that's something I can live with. So that's my story. I signed away my home to help my daughter, and I ended up homeless. But in the end, I found something stronger than a roof. I found purpose. Would you have forgiven her? Would you have taken her back after what she did? Tell me in the comments, and if my story spoke to you, make sure you follow for more true stories like this. Stories that remind us that even after the worst heartbreak, we can still rebuild with dignity and grace.